Story begins in the heart of a quiet, breathtaking Swiss village surrounded by towering, snow-capped Alps, where a young, exceptionally talented mobile seamstress named Barbara Duggen is struggling to survive. Barbara lives a lonely, highly solitary life following the tragic passing of her beloved mother, leaving her with a failing sewing business that is heavily burdened with debt. She spends her long days driving around in a tiny, white utility van, carrying her trusty sewing machine, drawers of colorful threads, and various sewing tools to clients across the region. On this particular day, Barbara is rushing to complete a critical, high-pressure appointment. She has been hired as the main seamstress for a demanding, extremely unpleasant bride-to-be named Grace, who has been widowed for 5 years and is finally getting married again. Grace is incredibly impatient, loud, and repeatedly complains about Barbara being late, continuously comparing her work to the disciplined, flawless standards of Barbara's late mother. As Barbara is carefully working on the back of the wedding dress, attempting to attach a final button, the fussy bride refuses to stand still. Grabbing the delicate button, Grace accidentally drops it, and it rolls across the wooden floor, falling straight down into a narrow ventilation grate. Instead of showing any understanding, Grace begins to shout, accusing Barbara of being completely incompetent. Since Barbara did not bring any spare buttons in her mobile kit, the angry bride orders her to drive all the way back to her shop, retrieve a replacement, and return to the venue immediately. With no other option, a frustrated Barbara gets into her van and begins the long, winding drive through the dense, shadowy forest. While driving along the isolated forest road, Barbara is suddenly forced to stop. In the middle of the road, she stumbles upon a chaotic, bloody crime scene. 2 motorcycles are lying on their sides, surrounded by debris, scattered packages of drugs, and 2 pistols. 2 riders are lying on the asphalt, injured and bleeding from a violent crash. One of the riders is Beck, who is wearing a black helmet, and the other is a young man named Joshua Armitage. They're crawling toward each other, desperately struggling to reach a small, metal briefcase containing a massive amount of cash. This unexpected, high-stakes encounter forces Barbara to make a critical, life-changing decision. 3 distinct paths open up before her, each leading to a completely different destiny. In the first timeline, Barbara decides to commit the perfect crime and steal the money for herself. She desperately needs the cash to pay off her mounting debts and save her mother's shop. Using her specialized sewing skills, she opens her sewing kit, takes out a long spool of strong, red thread, and ties a needle to the end. Standing at a safe distance, she carefully throws the needle, lacing it through the triggers of the 2 discarded pistols lying near the injured men. By pulling the thread from behind her van, she drags the weapons away, hoping to prevent the men from shooting. However, the desperate men notice the movement, and in the ensuing struggle, they manage to grab the guns, shooting and killing each other on the spot. Barbara quickly grabs the briefcase of cash and drives away, believing she has successfully committed the heist. However, as she drives further down the forest road, panic sets in. Barbara suddenly realizes she left her signature needle and thread at the crime scene, a piece of evidence that could easily lead the police straight to her shop. She turns the van around and hurries back to retrieve it. To her absolute horror, Beck is still alive, gasping for breath and holding a gun. In a moment of pure panic, Barbara decides to drag the injured Beck into the back of her van, intending to hide him, but she is forced to leave her needle behind, which is run over and bent by her van's tires. She drives back to her shop, drags Beck up to the attic, and ties him securely to a wooden chair, shortly before the demanding bride. Grace shows up at her shop to angrily demand her button. Barbara manages to distract Grace and send her away, but the tension is far from over. Once Grace leaves, Barbara returns to the attic to deal with Beck. Beck explains the truth behind the crash. He was trying to buy drugs from Joshua, but Joshua tried to steal the money, leading to a high-speed chase and shootout. Beck warns Barbara of a terrifying reality. Joshua's father is Hudson Armitage, a ruthless, cold-blooded drug lord who will hunt down anyone involved in his son's death. Beck urges her to run, but Barbara cannot bear to abandon her mother's shop. Instead, she decides to use her sewing genius to build a complex, thread-based trap in the shop, lacing Beck's pistol to the doorframe. Hoping to make the two criminals kill each other, she waits. When a menacing Hudson Armitage arrives, the trap is triggered, but it fails completely because Beck's pistol had no bullets. Terrified, Barbara flees into the thick forest behind her house. Hudson relentlessly pursues her, shooting her in the leg, rendering her unable to run. He catches up to her, demands to know where the money is, and brutally strangles her to death. As Barbara lies lifeless on the forest floor, Hudson opens the briefcase, only to find it is rigged with a motion sensor bomb. He leaves the money behind, leaving Barbara dead as a result of her greedy decision. In the second timeline, the clock winds back, and Barbara chooses a different path. She decides to call the police. An elderly, slow-moving local police officer named Rosie arrives at the scene. Before Rosie pulls up, Barbara secretly slides the briefcase into the trunk of her van, but her suspicious behavior is noticed. Rosie arrests Barbara along with Beck and Joshua, taking them all to the small, local police station. Joshua warns them that his father, Hudson, is already on his way to slaughter everyone. But Rosie ignores the warning, focusing instead on officiating Grace's wedding, which is taking place in the next room. Stuck in handcuffs and realizing she's in grave danger, Barbara plans a clever escape. She spots the handcuff keys lying on a desk across the room. Working together with Beck, she uses her sewing tools to construct a makeshift grabber out of rolled paper, thread, and a needle, while Beck uses his belt to toss toward the desk. After several tense, quiet attempts, they manage to hook the keys. However, Beck betrays Barbara, unlocking his own cuffs, stealing the briefcase from the evidence locker, and running away, leaving Barbara locked to her chair. Desperate, Barbara strips a copper wire from a nearby CCTV camera, attempting to use it to shock her cuffs open. Before she can finish, the brutal Hudson Armitage bursts into the station. He immediately shoots Rosie, who survives only because she is wearing a bulletproof vest. As Hudson prepares to execute Barbara, Rosie rises and plugs the live CCTV wire into the outlet, electrocuting Hudson. However, during the chaotic shootout, Barbara is struck by stray bullets and dies, making her the only casualty of this timeline, while Beck escapes with the money. In the third timeline, the clock winds back again, and Barbara chooses the safest option. She decides to drive away and not get involved. She returns home, but looking at her failing shop, she realizes she cannot survive without the money. Driven by desperation, she drives back to the forest, only to witness Hudson brutally executing Beck. Terrified, Barbara grabs the briefcase and flees to a nearby diner. Hudson and Joshua pursue her, but instead of killing her, Hudson orders Barbara to sew up a deep wound on Joshua's leg in the diner's restroom. While stitching the wound, Joshua quietly tells Barbara about his father's cruelty and tyrannical control, expressing his deep desire to be free. Sympathetic, Barbara devises a brilliant plan. She tells Joshua to hold a spool of red thread, which she secretly connects to the trigger of Hudson's pistol. She then uses a blue thread, running it around the diner while playing music and dancing to distract the mob boss. Once the trap is set, the demanding bride, Grace suddenly enters the diner, creating a noisy distraction. Barbara tells Joshua to pull the blue and red threads. The trap works perfectly, triggering Hudson's own gun to shoot and kill him. However, Barbara's greed takes over once again. She snatches the briefcase, abandons Joshua, and drives home. Joshua desperately chases her, not to get the money, but to warn her about the bomb inside the briefcase. Unaware of the danger, Barbara opens the briefcase in her shop, triggering the bomb and dying in the explosion. Finally, the clock winds back to the very beginning, back to the moment inside Grace's dressing room. Barbara realizes that acting on temporary, impulsive emotions only leads to disaster. Instead of letting the button fall into the grate, she exercises patience, catches the button, and completes the dress without leaving. She never drives through the forest, never encounters the crash, and remains safe. On her drive home, she is stopped by Hudson Armitage, who simply asks for directions. Barbara politely shows him the way, and a grateful Hudson rewards her with 3 thick stacks of cash. Barbara saves her shop, stays out of danger, and receives an honest reward, showing that patience and clear thinking are the ultimate keys to survival. To make sure we have enough descriptive depth, let us expand on Barbara's internal thoughts and the detailed environment of the Swiss forest. The forest itself is thick with ancient pine trees, their branches heavy with fresh snow, blocking out the sun and creating deep shadows along the winding road. The silence is almost absolute, broken only by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. When Barbara encounters the crash site, the smell of burning gasoline, engine oil, and blood fills the cold air. She can hear the groans of the 2 injured men, Beck and Joshua, who are desperately dragging their broken bodies toward the briefcase. When Barbara sets her first thread trap, her hands are shaking, but her eyes are focused with mathematical precision. She has spent her entire life studying the tension, strength, and behavior of threads, and she knows exactly how much force is required to pull the heavy steel pistols without snapping the thin string. Her mother had taught her that every thread has a breaking point, and Barbara has to calculate that point in a matter of seconds. In the police station, the environment is old and dusty, with wooden floors that creak with every step. The ticking of a wall clock is loud and persistent, adding to the building's suspense. The keys are sitting just out of reach, and Barbara has to use a sheet of paper from her notebook, rolling it into a tight cone to serve as a guide for her needle. She whispers instructions to Beck, who is sweating and panicking, his belt buckle scraping against the floorboards as he throws it. During the final confrontation in the diner, the music playing from the old jukebox serves as a perfect cover. Barbara moves around the wooden booths with the grace of a dancer, looping the blue thread around chairs, table legs, and decorative lamps, creating an invisible web of doom. Hudson, who is drinking a cup of hot coffee, does not suspect a thing, believing the young seamstress is simply eccentric or mad. When Grace enters the diner, her loud voice and angry gestures create the ultimate distraction. Grace complains about the penalty and the button, shouting at the waitress and drawing everyone's attention. This brief moment allows Joshua to pull the threads, ending his father's reign of terror. Ultimately, the film is a masterclass in how small choices lead to massive consequences. If Barbara had chosen to steal, she died. If she chose to call the police, she died. If she chose to run, she died. It was only when she chose patience, control, and avoided greed that she found a safe, prosperous path. This teaches us that sometimes the best decision is to wait, keep a cool head, and not let our emotions guide our actions.